All good.
Okay, everybody, and welcome to today's CX Quick Tips. We're looking at it September 21st, 21. So 9/21/21 for those of you who are keeping score. And if you're keeping score, this one's going to be rated pretty high because we have Diane Majors on the show with us. Diane, welcome.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you, Jim.
That's always good to have you. And remember, these CX Quick Tips are only about 10 minutes in length. So we're going to hit on a particular topic or subject. We're going to get deep real quick and hopefully give you some actionable items so that you can really make a difference for yourself and for your team and for your organization. And so, Diane, you provided me with some information that for me is going to guide our discussion. And I love it because, being somebody who is a certified emotional intelligence practitioner, and reason I even did that is because I struggled with a lot of those things. But understanding these, concepts, systems, frameworks, all of that is vitally important. So if you could kind of help us understand is when we talk about customer experience excellence requiring emotional conversion, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, it seems like that's a mouthful. But let me kind of bring it to a level of understanding. So what won't surprise you is that I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. So a lot of things that I learned about psychology and how people think and how they feel and how it changes their behavior is kind of where this came from. The whole concept behind emotional conversion is every time you get a call or you have an interaction with someone, they're coming with emotions already on their sleeve. Sometimes they're deep in their heart. Sometimes they're coming out very in your face sometimes, but it's helping us when we think about what emotion is that person feeling right now? What are they portraying to me? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it joy? Is it curiosity? Where is that person when I'm starting that interaction with them? And the conversion part of it is if we're able to move people from an identified emotion to something that's different and better, that's more positive, we're going to end up with that person feeling like that interaction was positive for them. Because even though they might not say it in their head, I went from angry to satisfied to delighted, they're going to feel that. And so our ability to be purposeful about identifying the starting emotion and where they end up in the interaction is what we call emotional conversion.
Okay, so and I think what you're saying here is really the most important point of emphasis is that we have to identify that, not them to identify it on our behalf, because people can describe themselves or their situation quite differently when we start talking about really getting to the root and emotional elements that are driving whatever situation. And I also want to point out, and we're not going to get into in this discussion, but these elements are also vital for your internal customer interactions, relations, and your team members and being a better leader. That's another discussion. We're focusing in on the customer experience. So when you start talking about customer service taking on a whole new meaning, elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I always call a customer service team an engagement team. Because essentially what you're doing is somebody's coming to you with something, they're coming to you with a need. And sometimes that need is functional where they need you to fix a problem they have. But they're also coming to you with an emotion and they want you to help with that emotion as well. Now, they're not going to talk about it. They're not going to say, I'm feeling X. Occasionally they will, but you're going to have to be perceptive enough to really identify that. And there's a trick that we're going to give you. We're going to post on the site called Plutchik's emotion wheel that literally helps you identify where they are. It almost looks like a game board, but you can identify where is that person and what that might they be feeling. And then what is the more positive way I can help in that piece. So this whole concept of emotional conversion is from a bigger story, and I say that purposefully, is when I have people tell me about an experience they've had, an interaction they've had, they tell me what happened, they tell me how they felt about it, and then they tell me how they changed their behavior because of that. And I think that's when we talk about emotional conversion and saying, if I call in and I'm telling somebody a story and they can sense what I'm feeling and get me to a better, more positive feeling, that I'm going to change my behavior in a more positive way. It's just that's the process that we go through, right? If you think about experiences you've had yourself, based on the emotions you've had, it changes your behavior with the brand or organization. That's really what we're after, is how we understand, yes, internally, but also customers who are calling or coming in or we're interacting with. Absolutely.
So when you start getting, talking about the Plutchik's wheel, I mean, for me, looking at it without doing all of the background research and understanding of the wheel and the interpretations associated with it, to me, it's like in the middle, there was the intensity emotions, and so for us, we need to identify where people are and hopefully move them out away from the intense moments that are intense emotions that are negative in nature. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. If you think about typically, I mean, I worked in a call center for a short period of time. It is a tough job. It is emotionally draining. And the one thing that can refill your well, if you will, of emotion is when you identify how somebody else feels and you are empathetic to them. So a lot of people are doing empathy training. Empathy training is great, that I really understand where I'm trying to understand where you are. And I'm putting myself in those shoes to say, if I was in that same situation, how would I feel? But just feeling that is not enough. It's what are we going to do with that? And how are we going to own that experience and own that relationship with the customer if we don't really think about how would I move them to somewhere else? Think about it. Your friend comes to you with a problem. What do? You're trying to move them from a frustrated opportunity to something that's more positive, where they feel like they're solving problems. That's emotional conversion. We do it every day. We just don't apply it at work. And it's just as important to do that at work with your coworkers and the customers calling in, because that's building a relationship.
And so for you, you talked about what we need to look at doing is being able to improve our emotional intelligence muscle. And you had also talked about tools in our toolkit. So this is one of the tools in the toolkit that will help us improve that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This is just one of those things, like if you've got, like, you don't have enough to figure out. Sometimes when we get into the very functional pieces, I know when I'm on calls with care members, sometimes I'm really frustrated. They're just talking about the how, but they're not recognizing the way that I'm feeling. And sometimes just saying it out loud, gosh, I can imagine how this sounds like you're really frustrated about this. Let's see if we can't solve that and get you to the point where you feel a little bit better about it. And that in and of itself is just that recognition is another tool in your toolkit. Just recognizing how people feel. And if they're not feeling that way, they'll tell you, but at least you'll know where they are, and you'll know ways that you can say, if they're really angry right now, I don't want them to feel that way. None of us do, right? We don't want another human being to feel those intense emotions. How should I get that person? How can I resolve the problem and help them feel better?
Well, and arguably, if we're starting to talk about those intense emotions that are negative in nature, maybe that's not the right time to even try to do that. I think that's also some of the things that we need to be aware of and maybe even work into our process, like an escalation procedure. For me, when I was in operations, one of the escalation procedures that we put in place, because it was significantly more effective, was not to try to solve the problem with a customer who was at a state of being irrational. You're not going to become and get to rational when they're in an irrational state. So what you could do is just collect all the information, tell them that you're going to do the research, you're going to call them back at a specific time, and then you do that. And it ends up being a much better outcome.
Well, right there, you're talking about the fact that if I am irrational, let's say, and I've never been irrational in my life, haha, my husband would tell you much different. If I was being irrational and somebody said, I'm going to take your information and here's what I'm going to do. Here's here's what I want you to think about over the next 2 days. Just know that I've got this, and that I'm going to call you back, and I'm going to make sure that you're informed about what's happening. I'm going to keep track of this, and then I'm going to have X, Y, or Z happen. Can't you feel your blood pressure going down, right? If somebody's just telling you what's going to happen. So emotional conversion is being purposeful about saying those things to de-escalate them. But it starts with identifying what is going on. Because a lot of times, again, as you said, we're focused on how do we get to the right information to solve this problem? And we're not stopping to combine that with that emotional piece.
Okay, so now you had mentioned something about your advanced degree in psychology. I mean, do I really need one of those in order to make a difference?
No, I'm just sharing tips and tricks from doing that, right? It's also like, here's another one. Here's a little bonus: reflection. Oftentimes when Jim, you and I have had lots of conversations, right? Sometimes I'll just rephrase and reflect. So Jim, what I hear you saying is blah, 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 right? That is a common technique and as a psychologist, that people hearing what they've just said and making sure you're acknowledging what you've heard and that you're trying to clarify to really understand is a technique in and of itself. So there's another one.
Well, that's one. I mean, there's just so many of those that I think for us, if we oftentimes get ourselves pulled into the emotion, we don't think about them. We lose our mindfulness.
Yes.
And so for me, I've tried to make sure that I don't lose that composure and then really think about the process that I need to go through, because ultimately, even though when we start talking about human beings unpredictable, you know, it has been shown that they're unpredictable in predictable ways.
Well, yes, they are. And if you think about that, to add into this opportunity, when you're talking about solving a problem and it's rational, only about 10 to 15% of what we do as human beings is rational and conscious. 85%, 80 to 85, 9 more than that is subconscious and emotional. I won't say irrational, subconscious and emotional. So why wouldn't we be purposeful for solving their problem from a very, here's tactically how I'm going to do it, to also solving where are they when they come in, what are they feeling, and did I actually convert somebody over to a better emotion where they feel satisfied, like I said, or delighted, or even less angry or less frustrated. And how I'm handling that is the key to this, and being purposeful about knowing here's where they are, here's where I want to get them to, so you can solve both the functional and emotional side of the opportunity.
Well, and as you're talking, I start thinking about if we were to stop and take a look back at those people who excel at doing these things, oftentimes they're not using tools and tactics that are known like this particular wheel. It's part of their default mechanism. I mean, it's like, this is just the way that I've always been. However, we can essentially borrow some of those best practices, apply it to some of this science around, and then therefore improve our own skills.
That's exactly right.
Diane Majors, always fun talking to you, and I loved it. How do the CX Quick Tip listeners get in touch with you? Hey,
you can just find me on LinkedIn. Just spell the last name, Magers, and you'll find me there.
And Diane's also a frequent contributor to CX Global Media's Quick Tips. And Diane, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
My pleasure.